As far as our speaker tonight, Eric Jessen, he's a longtime board member of the Laguna Beach Historical Society, but prior to that, he's a longtime employee of the County of Orange. He was the chief of harbors, beaches, and parks. Wherever you live in Laguna Beach, Eric has lived close by at some time. For a while, he lived at Villa Rockledge. Now he lives in South Laguna. Okay, well, that's two places. So I've done quite a few programs with Eric. He's always very knowledgeable and very thorough. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Eric Jessen.
Thanks, Gino. That's my affectionate name for Gene. I didn't expect much of a crowd here tonight because this was kind of a technical undertaking working on these this assignment that I got from the museum industry, but we'll go ahead and get started here. Let's see, are we backing up or are we going? No, I'm not familiar with this. Okay, a couple of comments about how I got conscripted into becoming a museum research detective. It all started back around 2003. My friends Joe Ambrose and Mike Feddersen owned a significant plein air painting collection. And to my knowledge, it included the largest privately owned collection of Joseph Kleitsch paintings. And I had a lot of fun figuring out and telling them the locations of where the Kleitsch easel stood for many of his early Laguna paintings. And when the Irvine Museum decided to focus on Kleitsch's work, they referred Dr. Patricia Trenton to me as a resource for their research efforts. So that's how I first got drawn into this, was a Kleitsch project. Dr. Trenton of Century City is a very highly respected art historian from the Chicago Art Institute. And she was retained by Joan Irvine Smith and the Irvine Museum to develop a publication on Kleitsch's work, which is called A Kaleidoscope of Color, and probably some of you have seen it. But at Joe and Mike's suggestion, she gave me the task of finding the spots on the ground from which Kleitsch painted a number of his canvases. And the assignment took me about 4 years because I was still working at the county, so I only did it on weekends. An example of that work, I guess we point this to the computer. Okay. You can do that if you want. I can use, I've got a flashlight, so I don't need it.
Experiment with just this one over here. This is the last one that's on.
That's it. There you go. We got it.
Everybody okay with that?
I'm scared.
An example of that Kleitsch work can be seen in this view looking southwest across central Laguna. The landform depression in the foreground right here is Boat Canyon, where Riddle Field and the Pavilion Shopping Center is located. Okay? And the little gray cottage right at this location was that of early plein air artist Ann Robinson. And some of you may recall the old Robinson Ranch, also known as Escape Country, up by Trabuco Canyon and O'Neill Regional Park. It was a popular off-road recreational vehicle destination park in the 60s and 70s. And when my staff at Orange County Parks and I reviewed and placed conditions on the proposed development to tear the Robinson Ranch up and build a subdivision called Trabuco Highlands, I had the opportunity to visit the original Robinson Ranch house, which was, needless to say, a much more substantial residence than this pleasant little cottage right here, which is located actually at the intersection of Monterey. This is Monterey, unpaved in North Laguna, and Hawthorne, running down this way. So this house is right at the corner. And the house still stands and has been lovingly restored by, it's right located there. This is a photograph again of Boat Canyon where Riddle Field and the shopping center are, but there's the photo of the house. So this is Monterey Street, and here's Hawthorne. The house still stands and has been lovingly restored and enlarged by Scott and Julie Thomas. Coincidentally, Scott has been the manager of Orange County Parks Design for many years and oversees the development of the county's regional harbors, beaches, and parks, not the least of which include Aliso and Wood Canyons and Laguna Coast Wilderness Park and Aliso Beach County Park and South Laguna Beach Access Ways, which are all owned and operated by the county. Now, we're going to go right. After the Irvine Museum published Joseph Kleitch, A Kaleidoscope of Color, some questions arose about a couple of paintings of natural sea arches along the coast, which I never had worked on. So I got called in to straighten out and correct the locations for them, and I got started doing that by reconnoitering parts of our shoreline with Rick Balzer, who's on the board of the Art Museum. And in the Kleitch book, this particular canvas was titled Arch Beach. Arch Beach is at the foot of, it's just south of Bluebird. It's at the foot of like Agate Street. And it was erroneously titled Arch Beach. It's actually the right-handmost arch of the three arches at Three Arch Bay. So this was kind of an easy one to solve. We just went right there. But this one was a little bit more difficult because it has a real unique shape to this arch. It's almost like a windblown baker's cap. And it also was titled The Arch Looking Toward Arch Beach, therefore erroneously attributed to Arch Beach. But we were ultimately led to the conclusion that it actually is a painting of the now collapsed arch in La Jolla Cove, way down in San Diego. And I mention this in part because Gregory Horvath, who's a junior at UC San Diego and a native of La Jolla, helped me complete this La Jolla reconnaissance and research on this so that I didn't have to drive down there a bunch of times. But this later evolved into him becoming the most indispensable person in my Edgar Payne Sierra painting research. So we'll talk about him a little bit more later. So let's turn our attention from Kleitch, and for that matter, William Wentz, to another contemporary of both Kleitch's and William Went, Edgar Payne, who in 1918 with Anna Hills co-founded the Laguna Beach Art Association, which later became the Laguna Beach Art Museum. And for those of you that have been upstairs in the balcony area at the Art Museum, when you look through the opening looking down into the lobby, you'll see a bronze plaque on either side of the opening. It's a plaque of Edgar Payne on one side and Anna Hills on the other because they're considered the co-founders. Although he first visited Laguna Beach in 1909, I want to share with you 3 canvases in chronological sequence unrelated to Laguna that ultimately earned Edgar Payne very important recognition from the east to the west coasts. This one, called The Rendezvous, Santa Cruz Island, he painted in 1915 before he moved to Laguna. And it is a real showstopper in the current Payne exhibition now on display at the Pasadena Museum of California Art. In my humble opinion, it's definitely one of his finest paintings. This one here, in 1911, Payne returned to Laguna, and in 1915 he went to the Panama Pacific Exposition in San Francisco, where he got his first really heavy dose introduction into California plein air artwork. it was something that he wasn't really familiar with. And in 1916, he visited the Southwest, where he did this seminal painting, which became the jacket cover, actually, of the current museum exhibition catalog, which I have a copy of up here. In 1917, Payne moved from Chicago to Glendale, California, and further scouted around the Southland for good painting subjects. And here we see his painting of what is today Irvine Regional Park. A couple of connections here. In 1995, the county assigned my staff and I to gear up for the year-long 1997 Irvine Park Centennial celebration. Irvine Park is the oldest county park in the western United States. This resulted in me becoming fast friends with members of the Irvine family, and had that not happened, it's doubtful I would have ever been asked by Joan Irvine Smith to work on her museum collection. Secondly, the very same year that Payne painted this canvas, our own native daughter, Florence Yock, one of the first women landscape architects in the United States, was working on the master plan for this park. The Board of Supervisors hired a woman in 1918 to do the master plan, which was a little bit far thinking considering the more recent histories of things that go on in this county. Florence was one of 6 daughters of Joseph and Catherine Yock, who owned the Hotel Laguna. And St. Catherine of Siena Church here in Laguna was named after Mrs. Yock's patron saint. Their daughter Florence designed the El Mirador tract. Some of you might know what that means, but if you don't, it's that really fabulous neighborhood bound between Legion and Glenire and Clio, where you have El Bosque and the broad curved streets, Arroyo Chico and Los Robles. That tract was actually designed and laid out by Florence. But Florence's most famous work involved designing the sets for motion picture industry, including those for Gone with the Wind. She was the designer of the sets for Gone with the Wind and The Grapes of Wrath. So think of Gone with the Wind every time you enter the Hotel Laguna, because there's a definite connection there. In 1918, a lot of stuff was coming down in Payne's life. He made his first excursion into the eastern Sierra Nevada mountains, which became one of the mainstays of his landscape for the rest of his life. And he also moved to Laguna, where he purchased and remodeled his home studio at 506 Glenire. This is actually, it was at the time called Central Avenue, and this is where the location of Snyder's Cleaners is now, down as you approach downtown on Glenire. Okay, so let's go art sleuthing and check out a few works he did here in town. This canvas is entitled Laguna Coastline. Now, how many of you recognize those rocky islets over there? Oh, let me back up. Does anybody know these? Do you recognize where these are? Yep, you got it. Seal Rocks, okay. Which really made this a very easy painting location to solve. You can also see the South Laguna Ridgeline and the Dana Point headlands way off in the distance. And here is a close-up of Seal Rocks with Twin Points in the background. And here's the spot from which he painted the canvas. It was below Smith Cliffs. This is the Brinderson home that is in the vicinity of where Pancho Barnes's home was at the tip of Dos Rocas estate, now called Smith Cliffs. So it was painted from a vantage point at the rocks looking out in this direction. And when the exhibition curators submitted this canvas to me, it was erroneously entitled California Coast. Well, that was a lot of help. For all I knew, it could have been anywhere on the Central Coast or the North Coast. But actually, Does anyone want to hazard a guess of where this painting was painted? It was painted in Laguna. It's right here in our own backyard. It's the rocky bluffs and shoreline from Moss Cove looking northwestward past Woods Cove under stormy high tide conditions. The rich texture of the bluffs was somewhat stylized by Payne. And we'll shift back so that you can, I just hate this pointer because I've never used it before. Let's see. I want to go, no? Okay, so we're going to go forward. This is the current scene, and we're going to kind of go back and forth between the two, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. It's Woods Cove before the bluff tops got shaved off for the houses. So up here, you have, I hate this thing. I'm very sorry. It's very awkward. This got shaved off for these houses that you now see were built there, okay? And also, if we go back, in the distance, you can see Guna Peak, somewhat suppressed, and a suppressed version of Abalone Knoll in the distance. So he exercised a little bit. For some reason, he exercised. The biggest piece of artistic license he exercised here was that this kind of pyramidal landform does not exist. He simply inserted it into the landscape for compositional purposes. Now it becomes time for some real detective work. There were 3 paintings that were all rocks awash in the surf. They're not connected to any bluffs, and therefore there's no tangible and landform reference point that you could use to kind of pinpoint where exactly these rocks awash are located. This is Coward's Cove, painted in 1916, and The Restless Sea, painted in 1917. And finally, we have Eternal Surge, painted in 1920. Now, by the way, during this period, we're doing detective work tonight. I'm not telling you that much about Payne himself, but all during this period, he was exhibiting extensively in galleries, primarily in the Chicago area, but also in Texas, in some cases, New Mexico, and in Colorado. And he was winning major prizes. I'm not going to go into those details, but he was winning major prizes. He was winning major prizes in Paris and Venice, in Europe as well. So he was becoming very, 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 very widely recognized very quickly for a man that only stayed 2 weeks at the Chicago Art Institute and taught himself how to paint. Okay? Eternal Surge, by the way, draws a huge number of people at the exhibition. Every time I'm there, I see these crowds drawn around the painting, and you go and you kind of sniff them out, and most of them are like from the Midwest and the East Coast, and they're just drawn to the luminescent quality of the water that's rushing over the rocks in the painting. I suspect it's a very valuable canvas. So I thought to myself, how on earth am I going to tackle these 3 works methodically and systematically, of course, just like all of us in Laguna approach challenging tasks? But these are the steps that were undertaken to try to find those darned rocks in the surf, knowing full well that wave erosion wasn't going to leave them looking like they did when Payne worked on them. So the research steps, starting at the north end of town from El Morro Beach and Abalone Point all the way down to Three Arch, consisted of examining aerial oblique photos that are at the lifeguard headquarters, bluff top and shoreline hiking under stormy low tide and high tide conditions, offshore boat reconnaissance, and wading when necessary. To be avoided at all costs, but it wasn't avoidable. So now we got to go search the rocks. So we start here, and I have to admit, I really dreaded the task of having to peruse the Laguna shoreline. It's such a godforsaken, ugly place to look for the corpus delicti of rocks in the surf. So here we start out at the north end of town at El Morro Beach and Abalone Point. And we work our way around Abalone Point. Yawn. It's a sleepy part of town. Very quiet up there. And we get out the magnifying glass, so to speak, and carefully study the color and the composition and the geometry of the rocks. And here we've got some flat ones. No match with the paintings. Same here. Beautiful rocks, but not what we're looking for. I use these two slides to illustrate specific close-up examinations because I'd put you to sleep if I showed you tonight the same details for the whole Laguna shoreline. So we speed things up a bit with an occasional boat reconnaissance. And here you can see Crescent Bay Point and Seal Rocks. And then we get down to Twin Points and Coward's Cove. How many of you even knew that we have a Coward's Cove in Laguna? I see one hand. I know that there's a couple of people in this room that know about Coward's Cove. Well, let's see. We'll see a little bit later that Coward's Cove actually came to mean something here. It was absolutely necessary to scour the shoreline under a variety of tidal and weather conditions because Payne painted his rocks under a variety of such conditions. And it was kind of dicey in Shaw's Cove the day after we had this huge storm. This was wading, and I actually think this was, I took this picture the morning after the huge flood in Laguna Canyon in 2010, for which I chaired the flood task force. A little calmer here in Divers Cove, but still no match for the rocks that we're looking for. And I thought I might be getting closer to something here at Rockpile. It turns out that Payne borrowed one of the rocks here and imported it into two of his paintings, Coward's Cove and to some extent, Eternal Surge. That's this particular rock here. He moved it into place. I was cursing him. It gets a lot worse in the Sierra Nevada. But my 89-year-old mother was cursing me because she's an artist, and she said, look, he can do anything he wants. He's not painting it for you. So, and she's right, you know. I got spoiled because people like Kleitsch painted exactly what they saw. They never, ever, well, very rarely exercised any artistic license, but Edgar Payne exercised a lot of artistic license. So, anyway, we get down to the picnic beach, sniffing around, nothing there. And then we get down to Main Beach, where we see an example of a few areas in town where there aren't many rocks awash. They're primarily long, sandy beaches, like Main Beach and from Maine to Bluebird and Aliso and West Street beaches, and to some extent, Thousand Steps and Paradise Coves. They still have some rocks that have to be examined, though, but they're easier and faster to skip over. And we come back to some more serious rockage here in Arch Beach. In fact, the Arch Beach Arch is located right in this rock formation right here. And then Woods Cove has got some good rock stuff, but still no match. And the same with Moss Cove. And then the rocks really thicken up at Moss Point. Lots of dangerous climbing around there to look for a match with any of the three canvases. Absolute zilch. No matches. and then on to Rockledge, and which, by the way, is where I got my real start in town after I left my 1960s job at Laguna Nursery. I landscaped the Villa Rockledge after the cement truck smashed into it and lived in the tower, the stone tower right here, for 6 years, I think. And I started my small landscape contracting business called Biosphere, which I turned over to Eric's daughter, who ran my labor crews when I went to work for the county. And 40 years later, he and his wife have built it into a very, very reputable, very successful landscape beautification business. And here we can see the distinctive and unique rock ledge from which the neighborhood, Rockledge, takes its name. And we skip by the broad sandy beaches of Victoria and Lagunita to the richly textured rocks along the Montage Resort and Gulf Island area. Still no apparent match with Payne's rocks awash. And as far as some of our broad sandy beaches are concerned, there are some that have a few more rocks awash, like Camel Point and West Street, but still no match. And ditto at Secret or Table Rock Coves. And yes, there are plenty of rocks from South Paradise Cove through to Three Arch Bay, but they were of no help in matching any of the 3 unsolved Payne canvases. So to see if we missed anything, there was a clue under our nose all along, and that's the term Coward's Cove. An old place name many of us aren't even familiar with, and this is where our revered town historian, Jane Petty-Jans, comes to the rescue. It's obvious we had a Payne canvas titled Coward's Cove, but Jane came up with a historic postcard by that name. But someone along the way said that they thought that Coward's Cove was the old name for Shaw's Cove. But Jane reminded us that the old name for Shaw's Cove was Santa Ana Cove. So here's Coward's Cove, sitting right under our nose. This beautiful little slice of sandy paradise, wedged in between the 2 promontories at Twin Points, the Contino Estate. Now this is where it helps being a Catholic. The Continos are members of St. Catherine of Siena Church, and so am I. So I asked him if I could barge in on them and take a look around. And so I sauntered out across their dreamy yard, the site of many fundraiser events the Continos have been generous enough to host, and began to examine a pretty complex array of rocks off the west and east promontories. Ah, the sweet smell of success, there before my very eyes. Voila. Projecting out from the east promontory was the closest rocky composition that I could find to match not just Coward's Cove, but the Restless Sea and Eternal Surge. Yes, folks, all 3 canvases depict the same rocks under slightly different tidal conditions. And so Payne's lingering Laguna mystery was solved, albeit there can't be a perfect match because nearly 100 years of relentless wave erosion has slowly worn the rocks down. But thank God, comparatively speaking to most shorelines, Laguna's rocks are pretty darn resistant. Otherwise, I would have been at a loss like I was when I was left with no more than a hypothesis for the collapsed arch in La Jolla Cove with the Kleitsch painting. Okay, so we're done with Laguna. It's time to move on to the land of big rocks. Okay? So how did Payne get? Okay, wait a minute. Big rocks. How did Payne get from his Laguna and Los Angeles home studios all the way up into the Sierra Nevada? Well, he did it by car. And in fact, there was a full-on replica of his Model T Ford that was featured dead center in the middle of the exhibition at the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, surrounded by antique camping chairs and equipment. And you'll see it if you watch the PBS documentary that airs starting October 7th on KCLCS Channel 30th, or on other station broadcasts later. But I couldn't get a picture of the car for this program. Payne was noted for being at the forefront of plein air artists by arming himself with two revolutionary pieces of equipment. One, an automobile, and two, a camera. Both facilitated his ability to get around and efficiently record the scenes that to begin sketching, the sketching process that led to his magnificent canvases. And in fact, when he left for his first two-year European tour of the French and Italian Alps in 1922, he took his car. Can you imagine? He drove his car from Laguna Beach to Taos, New Mexico, through Chicago to New York City, put it on the ship, and took it to France. It's very similar to the opening scene of Julie and Julia, in which Paul and Julia Child's 1946 Buick Roadmaster Woody station wagon is lifted by a crane off the ship so that they could motor around in France in that giant behemoth, big white sidewall tires and all, blowing the minds of the locals there. So while we're transitioning to the subject of big rocks, before we actually get up into the Sierra, let's detour a little bit over to Europe for a moment so you can see examples of some of the paintings that Payne did there, some of which were exhibited in Paris and Venice and sold immediately. Here is Payne with his car after having driven across the Alps down into Rome. And note a little corner of the Colosseum right here in the corner of the photograph. After 8 decades of resisting having a sister city, it's quite a coincidence that Payne just happened to paint this canvas of Laguna's sister city, Menton, France. How prescient, huh? And his magnificent canvas of the Matterhorn that caused quite a buzz when it was exhibited in Paris. And you'll notice that actually, for those of you that are into brushstrokes, he tended to become a little bit more European impressionistic with his work while he was working in Europe. But when he came back to the U.S., he reverted back to the California impressionistic style. And his depiction of the magnificent Adriatic cargo ships in the Venice Lagoon, the design of which went virtually unchanged for 500 years. And he got there just in the nick of time because they became obsolete in World War I and are no longer a ubiquitous feature in the Italian landscape. You don't see them anymore, but you used to see them all the time. Okay, it's time to see Payne's work in the High Sierra, also known as the American Alps, or the Range of Light, as John Muir called them. And here we see an example of the shocking thrust of the Eastern Sierra, literally jumping skyward off the Owens Valley desert floor up to the top of 14,508-foot Mount Whitney. And this is Whitney Portal Canyon above Lone Pine, which he didn't go to, but it does dramatically illustrate the vertical thrust of the mountains. And this is my family's summer home there, from which the Payne Eastern Sierra research effort was staged. I wouldn't have been able to undertake the effort from Laguna Beach because of the almost insurmountable amount of driving that would have been required, but all told, over 12,000 miles was driven over the 3-year effort anyway. Okay, so the Payne exhibition curators gave me 14 canvases for which to try and find the locations in the Sierra backcountry. These are the titles. When all was said and done, 7 were painted up Big Pine Creek, 2 were painted up Bishop Creek, 2 up Mammoth Creek, 2 up Levining Creek, and 1 was undetermined. And since half of them were painted up in the Big Pine Canyon, let's go there and get started. But these are the research methods that were employed. First of all, obviously, a lot of hiking. 300 miles of hiking. Application of physical and biogeographic analysis. This is essentially standing at a place at given a certain time of day and studying the shadows, the folds in the mountains and the couloirs, the snow patterns, and the distribution of the specific species of pine trees that either would or would not match what's in the canvas. Consultations with mountaineers, the professional mountaineer guides, photographers and artists who exhibit, in places like Bishop and Mammoth on a regular basis, telescope analysis, and finally the application of a really revolutionary tool which really, really blew our socks off, peak sighting program software. Okay. Now, this is how Payne actually navigated his way up there in his car. These are the now historic Southern California Auto Club triptychs maps. The Auto Club didn't make fold-out maps. You had a five little cardboard things from LA to Ely, Nevada. And this little set, a partial set was given to me by longtime Laguna resident Gene Hamilton, who's a retired AAA executive. And it just so happens that I lucked out because this one starts at Lone Pine, where you turn off to my place, and 45 miles up the road at Big Pine, where Payne turned off into the mountains to do his paintings. So here we are. We're taking his route. We're downtown Big Pine at the intersection of Highway 395 and Crocker Avenue, also known as Glacier Lodge Road. No small coincidence that Mr. Crocker just happened to be on the Humboldt, the very same ship that James Irvine was on when they sailed from the Isthmus of Panama up to San Francisco to get rich in California. They were on the same ship. Fortunately, Crocker's riches established the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, where the current Payne exhibition first opened in February 10th before it moved to the Pasadena exhibition on June the 2nd, where it will close on October the 14th. So if you're interested, you best get up there before then to see it. Otherwise, you're going to have to go all the way to Tulsa, Oklahoma. So here we are, ascending the alluvial fan on Glacier Lodge Road, looking back down on the town of Big Pine. Same exact route he would have climbed up. This is Big Pine. In the distance are the Inyo and the White Mountains. And this is where the bristlecone pines, the oldest living creatures on the planet, live, right along the crest of these mountains. They may not look that big, but comparatively, they're almost as tall as the Sierra. They go upwards close to 12,000. The Sierra, with the photographers back to them, go up a little over 14. That's why they call it the deepest valley in America, because the Owens Valley is the deepest valley. There is no valley with mountain ranges that high on either side of it. And now we're approaching the entrance to Big Pine Canyon. And now we're in the canyon at the site of the historic Glacier Lodge, which unfortunately has managed to burn down 3 times, most recently just a few years ago. And it was from here that Payne got settled and marshaled the pack trains to take him into the backcountry. And here's the trail that he took from the end of the road. And so we have 2 forks in Big Pine Creek. Let's go up the South Fork. Rugged Slope, this is to where Payne did his first grand canvas in the Eastern Sierra. It's called Rugged Slope and Tamarack, and it took 3 years to solve. It was the longest of all the paintings that were assigned. But we now know that it depicts the skyline created by the 13,390-foot Mount Jessen, right here, at the center of the canvas, and trending to its right, 14,153-foot Mount Sill, and 14,003-foot Thunderbolt Peak, and the left flank of 13,000 510-foot Mount Gailey as viewed from a point northwest of Eleanor Lake. And for composition purposes, Payne inserted this huge granite massif, which doesn't exist, and he also imported the lake and trees for composition. Believe you me, I was cursing this guy out. Oh. So why did it take 3 years to solve? Well, this is a classic example of where you got to be real careful about this stuff, because this is a big canvas. It's almost 5 by 5 feet. And by the way, it won the Kahn Prize at the Chicago Art Institute in 1920, essentially the most prestigious art award granted by the Chicago Art Institute in that particular year. What Payne was really doing was introducing the remote, little-known Eastern Sierra Nevada to the world, because there wasn't, it wasn't like Yosemite where you had Thomas Hill and Alfred Beardstadt and great artists from the East drawn because of the magnificent waterfalls. I found out as a participant on the panel at the Payne Symposium on the 25th of August, the reason why Payne didn't do Yosemite and Mount Whitney, for example, is because he didn't like places that were crowded. He was attracted to these remote areas. So he essentially gets the recognition for introducing the Eastern Sierra on a wide scale to the world. But getting back to why this thing took so long, there's a very, very elaborate gold-gilded frame that you can just imagine what the frames are like on these canvases. If you go see them in the museum, they're almost as good as the paintings themselves. But the tag on the frame said Lake Sabrina. Well, Lake Sabrina is up the middle fork of Bishop Creek. So that was the first place we went. And this is Lake Sabrina. And we're looking up at Mount Hakel, actually. Is that one up there. And we do some telescope analysis. We're lucky because in the winters of 2009 and 10, we had two of the heaviest winters in the Sierra since 1969. So we had snow patterns that better matched the time when Payne was working in the Sierra, kind of trying to match the snow patterns in the couloirs and stuff like this. But then, in 1990, the Irvine Museum published, I believe it was its first published book. It was called California Light. And it was a plein air arts book. And the curator in it, they published this painting in it. And the curator said that it was actually Mount Stewart and Tamarack Lake in the Mineral King Quadrangle of Sequoia National Park. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the Sierra, you'll know that that's 125 miles to the southwest on the west side of the Sierra. And it caused a great deal of suspicion because Payne didn't paint any other canvases in the area. All of the canvases are in one small area except for this one. So we became suspicious about the integrity of that. And so, but nevertheless, we studied the topography, and it looked like there could have been a match at that location. But what it turned out to be was that there was a big fat clue right above our noses as we motored up Glacier Lodge Road, and that's this Mount Jessen right here. And as we get closer into the canyon, we can see the tip of Mount Jessen from a different angle. And when Wayne Pyle, who's the guy that had control of the peak sighting software program, came into the picture, voila, we managed to solve the location, this being Eleanor Lake, and these being Mount Sill, Mount Jessen, and the ones that I pointed out. So this is the location, and this is actually near the Palisades in the South Fork of Big Pine Canyon, right in the same backyard as all the rest of the paintings. But it was a very remote spot. And By the way, well, I was, once in a while I had to take a little vacation. So I was down on the beach on the south coast of Sicily, basking in the shadows of the temples at Agrigento, and my mountaineer assistant, Greg Horvath, had in one day scaled up and down Half Dome in Yosemite. One day, not overnight, no overnight. Came down off the mountain, jumped in his truck, drove from Yosemite over Tioga Pass to Mono Lake, down 395 into Big Pine and up Big Pine Canyon Road, slept in the back of his truck, and the next morning got up and raced up to Eleanor Lake to get me a picture of Eleanor Lake. Well, I'm on the beach on the south coast of Sicily. So anyway, youth has its advantages, but this is a real life view of Mount Jessen, and you're never going to get perfect matches between the actual terrain and the paintings, because I found that there's never, you don't find any unanimity in this, even among artists and photographers. And in the Sierra, all you have to do is step forward 5 feet and sideways 5 feet, and you have a different perspective on the same thing from than where you were standing just a couple of minutes ago. So now let's run up the North Fork of Big Pine Creek, moseying through this beautiful grove of quaking aspens, in search of the location for Solitude's enchantment. Now, this was the first canvas that was given to me. Thanks, Mr. Payne, for the title, Solitude's Enchantment. No clue. It could have been in the Himalayas. I mean, there was absolutely no clue. He tends to use some, in other paintings, he uses titles that do give you a better idea. And also another painting up the North Fork, Topmost Crags, where we find basically a perfect photographic match. But along the way, we're interrupted by a boo in the forest. None other than Lon Chaney Sr., who was building his cabin at the very same time that Payne was painting up there. So during the day-long August 25th Payne Symposium, the panel was asked to reflect on Payne's contribution to American art and California art in particular. That was the first question that was put to the panel. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and here I am, this turnip that fell off the truck, this little bump on the log, sitting up there with all these erudite museum directors from New York City and Boston and Chicago, and, gallery owners from New York City and stuff, and nobody had an answer to the question. So it was I don't know whether they didn't have enough coffee yet at 10 o'clock in the morning, but there were 88 people in the audience, and so I chimed in and I said, well, when he returned from Europe in 1925 and drove his car from New York Harbor to the Chicago Arts Institute to give some lectures, this is Payne now, a young man named George Harrell came up to him. And to make a long story short, Harrell jumped into the car and rode to Laguna Beach with him. And we have George Harrell arriving in Laguna Beach. So it was Harrell who did the historic photographic portraits of our early plein air artists that still hang on the stair landing at the Art Museum, like this one of Payne. And Edgar Payne set him up as a caretaker of Mal St. Clair's cottage at Carmelita and Flora in Woods Cove, now the home of Herb and Mary Rabe. And what with the spate of movie stars hanging out in Laguna, Harrell's photographic talents were quickly recognized, and he moved his studio to Hollywood, where he embarked on his remarkable career of photographing the stars. And here we have Betty Davis for the motion picture The Letter, and Errol Flynn, 1938, and this showstopper, Jean Harlow, 1935, and my mom's Van Nuys High School chum, Jane Russell. And with that, it's easy to recognize that one of Payne's contributions to American art was spawning the career of George Hurrell, let alone his own magnificent canvases. By the way, this is the movie The Outlaw, for which Howard Hughes invented the bra for her. My mother reminded me of that today. All right, and so we turn to one final example of Payne's Sierra work, Fifth Lake. This one is important because it's owned by the Smithsonian. So when I found out that there was something wrong with the composition of it, it was a kind of a nice feather in our caps. The canvas depicts the scenery up the South Fork of Big Pine Canyon. It's a direct view of 12,242-foot North Palisades Peak right here, with 14,080-foot Polemonium Peak to the right here. But the mind twister is that Payne imported Fifth Lake from the North Fork of Big Pine Creek into the South Fork, a distance of 2.4 miles to the southeast. And actually, I made a nice junket out of this three-year research effort. I did take a month and I went and did research at the Metropolitan Museum in New York City and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts and the nation's oldest art museum, the Wadsworth Atheneum in Hartford, Connecticut, where we solved this mystery about this lake. It was done in Connecticut. Because the curators in these museums, when somebody walks in to working on a project like I was, they just fall all over your feet because people don't do this kind of work, and they get real excited about it. So, and then we have the actual location of Fifth Lake, with a different mountain composition in the background, because the lake got moved. And this is the spot that the peak sighting program software indicates where Payne moved it. And actually, you can see these mathematical lines that are all plotted. This is all mathematically done by plotting these lines up here in this peak sighting program, and that's all statistically done with the ridge line in the canvas. But here's a picture more of what the North Palisade looks like on the ground, taken by Mr. Horvath, my mountaineer's assistant. And then here's the Inyo, let's see, Inyo National Forest map. Yeah, this is, the map is up on the wall over here for anybody who wants to see it afterward, but this is a Inyo National Forest map that actually shows the locations of the Payne canvases in the Big Pine area. The map also has the locations for the Bishop and the Mammoth and the Lee Vining canvases. And one final note, Payne Lake, named in honor of tonight's Laguna personality. It's located up the North Fork of Bishop Creek, right here, circled. I don't think this pointer is it burning out on me? Yes, it is. Okay, we go to another one. It's right here, right against the Kings Canyon National Park boundary. This is Payne Lake. And here's Edgar Payne standing at his lake. But the interesting thing is that he died in 1947, and it wasn't until 1981 that the U.S. Board of Geographic Names named it after him. So it must have had an informal name of Payne Lake for a while. It's a very hard lake to get to. Because we're kind of running low on time, I just simply want to pay some accolades to the people that helped. This is my mountaineer assistant, Greg Horvath, who, by the way, just last Friday broke the world's ascent record for Mount Whitney in 2 minutes and 7 seconds. That's not round 2 hours and 7 seconds. That's not round trip. That's to the top, one way up. which was he shaved 2 minutes and 9 seconds off the previous record. And there are some remaining Sierra canvases that I'll just run through. This is up Bishop Creek, Mount Ritter, and Lake Ediza, and a corroborating photograph. Granite slopes up Mammoth. Slopes of Lee Vining, which Dr. Elizabeth Brown, who's in this room tonight, helped me on. We actually did this over Labor Day 2 years ago. Temple Crag up the North Fork of Big Pine Creek. Timberline, undetermined. This was the painting. We couldn't find the location. There was too generic of a composition. A view of the glacial path depicts the Palisades Glacier, the largest glacier in the Sierra Nevada. And topmost Sierra, which is up off of Tioga Pass Road. And then an untitled painting, which actually is another view of Mount Jessen back at Lake Eleanor. And some corroborating photographs. Now, if it wasn't for my parents, I wouldn't have the cabin. They gave it to me. This is them camping in Big Pine Canyon in 1946. And this is the deck from which various atmospherics, both astronomical. This was actually just the blue moon the last day in August of this year in the early morning. And the next morning, 7.5 degrees north. Astronomical phenomenon. And then there's weather phenomenon. These two, this cloud formation changed to this cloud formation in 1 minute. I can only wish that Edgar Payne got to see atmospherics like this when he worked in the Sierra. Thank you.
So if anybody would like to make a comment or ask a question, please come up and speak into the microphone.
Questions, please. Don't hesitate.
As Eric mentioned, the Edgar Payne retrospective is at the Pasadena Museum of California Art, and it runs only until October 14th.
Oh, Carrie. Carrie Brief's stepson.
I started off early in the lecture saying the French and Italians were quite enamored with his work, which is a very tough audience.
Very.
So I was curious to know what was it vernacular, was it the wilderness of America that drew, or was it a combination of both his skill and the perception of what?
You know, I'm not a Payne expert. I was simply the geographer that found the locations for the paintings, but I have picked up a little bit along the way. I don't know to what extent he exhibited paintings of the Sierras or of Laguna Beach. I don't have any knowledge of him exhibiting those paintings in Europe. All I know is from the catalog that he went there and painted paintings in the Alps and along the Mediterranean coast, and they exhibited those paintings in Europe. And that's why I showed you those three of Montan and the... So, yes, a very discerning, very, very tough crowd to please, especially the French. Let's face it, they were snobs, right? Yeah, and you know, it really surprised me that he was so widely acclaimed. His work was so widely acclaimed. Just because you'd think that because he was a foreigner, they'd just go and not pay any attention to him. But he really, his skills really blew him away. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think so. Just put your mouth up to it. No. Oh, is it under? Did I kick it?
Is there an engineer in the room? You face any way you want now.
Oh, okay. I was a docent at the Irvine Museum, and we heard some other comments about Edgar Payne. He used to pack in, I can't remember, by I think donkey or something, to go to these places in the summer. And he would take his daughter and his wife, and his wife was also an artist, and they would paint, for 2 or 3 months in the summer. And his daughter had a lot of sketches that he had done, and they were sold for a while. In fact, they may still have some at DeRue's in Laguna Beach. And they were etchings and, things that he had drawn so he could paint later. I think that's all. I probably had some more stuff, but it's
I'm
not,
really glad
not
you brought that up, because I couldn't tell everything, but without DeRue's, we'd be up a creek.
Yeah.
DeRue's is a very revered dealer that, of all places, has been located in Bellflower for decades.
Yeah.
Now they have a gallery in Laguna Beach, but for decades, all these connoisseurs of art have been traipsing to Bellflower to buy paintings. And DeRue's has been a major purveyor of the works of Payne and other major artists. And Payne's daughter left the family archives to DeRue's. So when you open up this catalog, almost every third or fourth image in it says DeRue's, courtesy DeRue's, courtesy DeRue's, courtesy DeRue's. They were only seconded by an earlier dealer named Stendhal. Stendhal Gallery was at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles during the days when William Wendt and Joseph Kleitsch and Payne were young, aspiring artists, and that was the gallery where these men made their careers. That's where all of their stuff was sold. The main one. In fact, they would throw. Stendhal would throw parties. Stendhal threw a huge party for Payne before he went off to Europe. And by the way, the kind lady mentions he dragged his wife and daughter up into the back country for 3 months.
Yes.
The daughter was a little bit, had some allergy problems. She wasn't a happy camper. They had a huge fight at one point, and the wife moved out. I mean, they did get, I won't say cabin fever. That's what we call it at my place. I think they call it camping fever. That was sometime later in the 40s. And they also accompanied his wife and daughter, even though I didn't mention it, also accompanied him to Europe. They went with him everywhere. Yeah.
He and his wife separated at one time, or they may have been divorced. And
It was at the end of his life. 1946.
He, I believe, had cancer, and she stayed with him and took care of him until he died. And a lot of the paintings, I found out working at the museum, a lot of paintings are not signed by the artist until he's pleased with them. And he may do several canvases and no, I'm not finished with that one. And when it was perfect, then he would sign it. But there were a lot of canvases that he did not sign, and she signed after he died. But
You're spot on.
He did it.
Absolutely spot on.
Yeah, but she knew how. And also, DeRue's, I have taken painting. I have a serograph of the boats in Europe.
Yeah, and
There's
there were
a whole
two.
series of
He
them.
did two series. One was French fishing boats, and then the main ones, like the image that I showed, were the Italian cargo boats in the
Yeah.
Adriatic.
Yeah. And let's see. No, I've lost my train. That means my train of thought. Anyhow, and you showed a picture there of a house that was built on the cliffs. that had a round front that just as you come into Laguna.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
That, now, okay, I heard stories about that, but I don't want to repeat any of it because
Well, if you have anything bad to
Call the
say, we would
doctor-
like to hear
Call
it.
the Dr. It's actually, we call it the Dr. Montgomery House. Dr. Montgomery bought that lot from a grandchild of James Irvine II.
Oh.
Because James Irvine II laid out all those lots along from that octagonal house out to the point for his grandchildren. Katie, the matriarch, the oldest grandchild, didn't want to live in a family compound. So she and her husband chose not to build there. They stayed in the foot of Avocado in the big blue Caribbean house in Corona del Mar. And they sold that lot to Dr. Montgomery, who, those of us that are old enough remember Channel 5 ads for Dr. Beauchamp, the credit dentist, back in the 50s, with 5 or 6 offices and all these various kind of shady, scary neighborhoods that you wouldn't drive into. Well, I always thought of Dr. Montgomery. Let's just put it this way, he had many, many dental offices. And he's the one that built that house. And he was having a heck of a time getting it through the Coastal Commission. And Richard Bigler brought me on board, and we did the landscape master plan for it that helped him get the house approved, which I've regretted for my entire life. I'm just waiting for something else to happen on that property.
Well, I'm very glad I mentioned it because then I found out about that house, and the story I heard was completely different. And I also wanted to say that Joan Irvine Smith, her favorite artist was Edgar Payne. Thank you.
And that's one reason why the Irvine, you can just set it down right there. The Irvine Museum owns that fabulous painting at Irvine Park of the sycamores.
Yes, I noticed.
Yeah.
I recognized it.
And if you see the PBS documentary, John Stern, who's the executive director of the Irvine Museum, is one of the major, people featured in the
wait a minute.
interviews.
And if anyone wants to know anything about a painting,
Man behind you has the mic.
if anyone wants to know anything about, I lost my train. What was I talking about? Derues. I took a serograph in of the boats in Europe, and he cleaned it for me, which was very nice. And there's also a serograph. He said he owned one of them himself. And I also took another painting in one time, and I forget exactly who was the artist. And I got taken to the cleaners on it because it was a famous artist, and I took it into Daru to have him look at it. And he cleaned the painting, and then he said something about, well, this artist did not paint that. And I said, oh. And he said, do you mind if I put the real artist's name on there? And so he took it out and put the real artist's name on the painting that I bought. So he's very knowledgeable, and he even gets frames sometimes to go on the paintings in the Irvine Museum, and they depend on him for cleaning and a lot of times just getting, like, if they really feel that the painting needs it, they'll get an old-fashioned frame. Thank you. Oh, okay.
Now, I heard that the real artist was Gene Felder, so we'll have to check that one out. Well, I'm up here to defend the honor of Bellflower, Eric. Now, I lived in Bellflower. Raise your hands. Anybody here live in Bellflower? Okay, then that makes me the authority on Bellflower. Now, it wasn't exactly the arts venue that it has since become when I lived there. There was Dairyland, and there was this particular fragrance in the evening hours that I recall quite well. But anyhow, my question to you is, this is a wonderful presentation, and is fascinating about the detective work involved. Did you
come across any written or literary evidence, journalistic writings, or anything like that left by Payne or by those who knew him that would corroborate your findings? I think it's just amazing that a person could move a lake and these huge rocks with nothing other than a paintbrush.
That's artistic license. Yes.
I really appreciate you asking that question, Tom, because when I was given the assignment, one canvas at a time was dribbled to me, and nothing was disclosed to me that there were any records. It was all original research. I found out after the fact that there were copious notes. Now, Payne did not keep a journal. He didn't write down, well, I hiked from 2nd to 4th Lake today, and we camped on the North Shore and caught 3 fish, and I painted this and that. He didn't keep those kind of notes, but there still were lots of receipts, expenditures for pack train operators, food provisions being brought into various encampments. He lived a rather elaborate style in the backcountry. It wasn't like us that would just hike up and take our own tent and sleeping bag. No, there's a 1946 Technicolor DVD available through DeRue's that shows him painting in Big Pine Canyon, and they take these very grand pack trains with cooks and porters and Sherpas.
And he obviously did not come from Bellflower.
But I didn't really, I have affectionate feelings for Bellflower because I went to Long Beach State and I commuted to there from Laguna Beach before there was a freeway. And Bellflower was the backside of Long Beach State, so.
Mentioned something once.
The DVD that you just mentioned, I just was at the art museum here in town, and it's for sale there. The Edgar Payne DVD that shows where he was painting.
It was actually produced by his nephew, and it shows Payne in Technicolor painting and composing canvases in the Sierra, basically in the last year of his life. Getting back to the comment, Payne and his wife, he was not an easy person to live with, but he had a nice long marriage, but towards the end of it, his wife moved out. She opened her own gallery. Actually, there was a gallery she had in Beverly Hills. She sold his paintings. To my knowledge, I don't know that they actually ever divorced, but within about a year after she moved out, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and he moved back into his house and took care of him until he died.
Eric, let me mention a few elementary things, just in case a few people in the audience may not be aware of it. So, the County of Orange separated from Los Angeles County in 1889, and in 1918, with Edgar Payne and Anna Hills, they founded the Laguna Beach Art Association, and they tell us it's the first cultural institution of the County of Orange. In the newsletter, we mentioned from the Frank Kuprian wrote this up, that the first year, Edgar Payne president, Anna A. Hills vice president, Mrs. Thaddeus Lowe second vice president. Okay, let me stop. For those who have come to our programs, who's Mrs. Thaddeus Lowe?
Florence Barnes's mother?
Pancho Barnes's mother, right? Okay. Perhaps. Anyway, those are the names there, right? Second Vice President, Nevada Lindsay. Secretary Henry Ducroof. Kreif. Corresponding Secretary Mrs. E.E. Jarris, for those attending our programs.
Laguna Lumber Company.
So the Laguna, the Elmer Jarris is going to be listed here as a director. And Elmer Jarris came to Laguna Beach in about 1900. And was a cigar maker. Look that one up. And it had a curio shop in the Laguna Beach Hotel. So the directors were E.E. Jarris, Joseph Skidmore. Okay, who's Joseph Skidmore? Is anybody coming to our programs? So, considered to be one of the first homesteaders in Laguna Beach was Nate Brooks. And that's Lorenzo Nathan Brooks, and he lived 50 years of blessed bachelorhood. when Mr. Skidmore finally died. And he went and he married Catherine Skidmore, and he got a package deal, including Joseph Skidmore, Guy Skidmore, Anita Skidmore, that Anita Street is named of, and some other daughter, and then Frank W. Kuprian. So this Laguna Beach Art Association, it spawned off the Laguna Art Museum. It spawned off the Festival of Arts, and then they created the Pageant of the Masters. And of course, thanks to that, we now have 2 other art festivals in town. And then an art school, for a long time was known as the Art Institute of Southern California, and now is the Laguna College of Art and Design. So the founding that Edgar Payne and Anna Hills did was, you know, how many towns do you drive into where it says, welcome to, you know, the home of the Festival of the Arts and the Pageant of the Masters? And it's because we consider ourselves an art colony, excuse me. We consider ourselves an art colony for very good reason. And Edgar Payne was certainly a very big part of that. I just, some of those basic things folks may not know. Who else has a comment or a question or would like to sing something to us?
Anyway, again, the exhibition is at the Pasadena Museum of California Art. It's on Union Street. It's very easy to get to. You simply go up the 5 and either take your choice, the 57 or the 605 up to the 210 and go west and get off at the Lake Avenue exit and turn left, go over the freeway, and it's right behind Pasadena City Hall, right on Union Street. It's very easy to get to. Old Town is right there with a lot of interesting restaurants. And the exhibition closes on October the 14th. And the PBS documentary starts airing on the 7th of October at 9 p.m. on Channel 30, and again on the 9th at 10 p.m., and then it'll air on other stations as well, but that's up to them to get it. So,
I have a comment and a question about how things all fit together when you start doing research. When the Ilsley House at 31351 Coast Highway was going to be destroyed and replaced with a modern house.
right.
We just started to research it and found out all these different things about Philip Ilsley, who was the person who built it, bought it from the Skidmore, bought the land from the Skidmores. And he was one of the founding members of the art gallery as well.
Oh,
and
he was?
And he had a gallery in the Ambassador Hotel also, where he sold
He also owned
works of Edgar Payne, supposedly.
He owned the Wilshire Oil Company, didn't he? Wasn't that something that came out
I don't think so. That was the second owner of that house.
Okay.
Anyway, it was really a thrill to go to the art museum and go walking around and looking at those tiles, and here's Philip Ilsley, which I think most of us have forgotten until we did that
so
research.
His name is on one of those concrete tiles?
Yes.
Now? Oh, that's wonderful. I didn't know that.
He later became the expert in swimming pools of Southern California and built the swimming pools of Joan Crawford and Jack Benny and numerous other Southern California notaries, notables, I should say.
Let me mention a few items. The table back there, we have envelopes. And of course, some people may say, well, what could I do with an envelope? Well, it's got the Laguna Beach Historical Society address, the Murphy Smith Bungalow at 278 Ocean Avenue. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for future programs or suggestions about anything, we would appreciate hearing from them. We're happy to do research for you. So if you have any questions or any information about Laguna history, of course, we always put a pitch in. If you have some photographs, we'd love to scan them in and we'll give them right back to you. And of course, if you have any money that you'd like to donate to the Laguna Beach Historical Society, that you could stuff the envelope. If you received the newsletter in the mail, we have your we have your mailing address. If you'd like to be on our mailing list, please sign in back there. And there are copies of the newsletter that you're welcome to take. And unless we have something else, let me turn it over to the president of the Laguna Beach Historical Society to close the meeting, Kimberly Stewart.
Thank you, Gene. Goodness, I'm not sure what else to say except that that was actually just one of the most wonderful programs. I just love that. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the contributions from everyone who came and added to all the research that Eric has done. And thank you all again for coming. This was just a delight.
Let's hear it for Eric Jessen.